All right, well, welcome everybody to today's Wednesday webinar. We're going to be doing the costing for assemblies, and what I want to do is try to go through some setups that you may or may not know up until through the new years that have effectively put in more into costing, but also kind of going back to the ground basics of how to get stuff going for your costing and just kind of setting up simple parts. Hopefully after this, you'll be able to know how to get one going for yourself and know how to customize templates, and then have some ideas too for being able to do quicker quotes with preset assemblies. And that's kind of the idea that I have here towards the end about getting some preset assemblies that you can then just kind of quickly change and maybe get some faster quotes than you would otherwise. So with this, basically what I wanted to do is kind of go over some different types of parts that we could implementize the costing templates, see how that kind of works. Well, there's an assembly template, and there is also essentially a machining template and a sheet metal template that can be used in there too as well. Some other stuff have been introduced into it, and that stuff kind of generally basically depends on some basic information from the geometry of your parts. So I have this part right here, or I should say model, and I can take a look at maybe some of the complications behind this model here that kind of create this whole assembly here. Now, what I'd like to do is not only get costs down here, but I'd also like to have control of the costs. So costing is available for anybody with a professional license or premium license, and the premium license just really just kind of lets you take advantage of the assembly templates. And if not, then you'd have to just do it individually. In any case, there is basically a need to go through part by part too anyways. There's just a few other extra things, and we'll go over as far as what assembly templates would cover in a premium license. So costing is an evaluate feature. So up here on the evaluate tab, I can immediately start a costing for the assembly. And usually what you get over here are going to be a lot of your default stuff. You can see some of this I've kind of changed around, and I've added these as I moved along. Right, so playing around with that. Where those get saved at are in file locations here under costing templates, and that way you can at least go back to that, save it out, or change if you need to. So we'll take a look at all that. First, what we'll do, we'll just go ahead and set this up. One of the things that I've noticed is great here that they've introduced is the toolbox parts. And so toolbox parts in 2016 were introduced, but if you don't have that selected when first doing a costing, it makes it a little bit more difficult to try and get that folder out. So what I have here in my assembly is three bolts there that I want to kind of account for. And keep in mind that a lot of these parts and costs and stuff may not be very realistic. So I'm just going to kind of throw in some numbers here and there, and then we'll show kind of where it's being affected. So here, for example, I'm just going to go in 225 for each of those toolbox parts. And then now when I hit the begin cost estimate, it'll pull this assembly template, which is then tied to these two types of templates. There's going to be a different template, one for sheet metal and one for machining. I'm going to go ahead and click on the begin cost estimation. All right, and so this kind of quickly gives me some numbers, but it might be deceiving to think that I'm pretty much done. Obviously, I have to kind of go through and make sure that things look correct. And not only that, but some of the stuff will usually go to a different interpretation or immediate first interpretation of what that part can be costed out to be. So let's first take a look at kind of what's going on here, what we see. So we've got a current, previous, US dollar, and we've got quick buttons for kind of generating a report and doing a costing pack and go. So we're not going to touch that. First, what we really want to do is kind of dig in a little bit and see what this is looking like on the inside. So the launch template editor allows me to come in and make some edits. But one thing to kind of note is that if you're starting out and you want to try this out for yourself, you'll notice that it's going to say a read only, so you can't really play with the template itself until you change that and save as your own template. After that, you can make changes. And what you'll see down here is that you have the ability to kind of add and take advantage of certain things. There's a whole gamut of things for the costing area, so we're not going to cover everything. One thing we're not going to cover well beads and fill beads, but that stuff can be accounted for. And purchase components, but we can do purchase components individually, and we'll be doing that later. So here on the main page of our assembly costing template, we've got a few options here. We can override with a certain dollar amount, or basically what it'll do is it'll just default follow these sheet metal and machining templates. So I can take a quick view or look to see which one it's referring to. Here, I was dumping some in there, but let's see here. It's the sheet metal default English standard that it's pointing to right now, so I'm not going to change that. I could through the browse through, or I could take a look and see what that sheet metal has firsthand. So that's kind of a neat thing. Basically what I did was I clicked on the button next to that browse, and then it shows me the tab here. This wasn't functional in previous years, some of the earlier versions and things like that, so that's pretty recent. If I go to edit the machining, I can take a look at what's going on over here. And so basically what I'm going to say here is here are the sheet metal. I'm just using the default one that's included. In the machining, what I decided to do is just go ahead and change what the quantities were. They from a lot of machine costs, they were charging at, the defaults have them at maybe $10 an hour, and labor costs, they have them at about 20, so something like that. So I just kind of changed these all the way across the board so that all machine costs are $100 and labor costs are $60 an hour. Just throwing around those numbers, obviously different circumstances, different situations, right? So off topic, getting off that topic now, and coming over here, I'll see this click to update, and that will kind of show me that I've got some of this stuff here kind of costed out. As I float my cursor over, I can kind of see what these costs are telling me. But the best way to kind of look at this is just to kind of start going through some of these parts one by one. So I'm going to take a look at just this first housing right here, housing part. And now here at the housing part, basically what I'm noticing is that there's a little bit of a warning here. So I'll take a look to see what that warning is about. And I'll find out that the message, it's a little small, but it's reading, there is no template information for this tool. And if I click on it, what I see is a pretty small pocket. Now, if I wanted to, I can try to see what flat end mill I want to place in here. And this seems to be the problem here for this situation. What I have here at smallest is a 0.375 inch diameter. If I take the measure tool and I just kind of measure around here, I can see that that's a lot smaller, and I'm not going to be able to kind of fit that stuff in there. So I've got kind of one of two choices. I could kind of switch stuff around, change things, or I could override some of these costs. So if individually I wanted to, I could just right click and apply a cost override. And then those would populate into these other folders. So pretty much the general setup that you have for the costing on this side that automatically populates is that you have setup costs, which may or may not be included for or ruled in by your template. Here, what the mill operations do is they'll pick out and look at pockets. And then we're going to look at how that's being calculated and how that gets figured out in the situation. You'll notice that some of these may not be correct, so you might want to account for that. You can maybe sometimes take some of these out, set to no cost, for example, and then that would actually move it down to this area under the no cost area. All right. So one thing that I could do is I could change the machining template that it's using. And I could do that by actually pulling from this drop down. I could make changes if I wanted to. So actually, yeah, let me pull this up here. And maybe say in the mill, I wanted to then change for steels, plain carbon. So the drop down is really kind of the way to go about maybe making these changes at the beginning. Kind of what I imagine is that people want to try this out. I would say try this out for a part that's already been quoted, and then take a look at the different options and try to see if you can match that up to your costs. And then you kind of start to break into habitual way of kind of cross-referencing this and making that consistent with your readouts. All right, so how this is calculated is based on the volume that it's cutting out and the feed rate that is calculated from these preset numbers. So this could be controlled by you. You can make changes here as you needed. And if we wanted to go ahead and obviously change this, here, by the way, you can click on the top column, and that'll kind of set things up so that they're sorted, and then you can find things a little bit easier. So each one that you would click on would then sort that through, and then you can make changes if you needed to. All of these are editable and can be changed on the fly if needed. All right, so what I did was I went a little bit out of the way here. And what I mean by that is that I just kind of played around with some of the stuff just to see something extreme. I think that's kind of my way to test things is I'll go for an extreme value or number and just see how that works. So here, obviously, the 3/8 inch wasn't working for those small areas or small pockets. So I went really small here, something just ridiculous, and then gave this just for roughing and allowed it to cost for that. And you could see the cost kind of skyrocketing quite a bit. Just to give you an idea, kind of give you basically a quick measurement here to give you an idea how big this is. It's a pretty small part. So, obviously too, sometimes, with smaller parts, you might have things like this to cost out. All right, so these are just kind of samples too. Some of these other parts you might see would probably be better done as a cast or things like that. But kind of the point of these exercises here is just to kind of show what's happening, how we can control that, and how you can change that to better manage it. So I think essentially what you would want to do is after you cost a part is to just kind of go through each and one of these features and see if you like what you're seeing. So I'll say, for example, here what I did not change for this template, the template called small flat end mill, which fits in these small pockets, is the machine per hour cost and the labor cost per hour there. But you can see it right there. I know it's kind of a small pop-up window there. If you have your window kind of shrunken in, you might want to expand it. But I have the total cost for what that is, and then it's saying, well, with that small of an end mill, it's going to take 3.96 hours. Because of the feed rate and all that stuff. And so that is why it's costing at that. I'm going to pull up the launch editor too again. The newer things in 2018, I believe, we have now tool engagement ratio percentage too as well. So this is another thing that could change the price there, or the cost, I should say. Here it's at 80%. So changing that would make a difference. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of clock out of there. Basically, the way I like to do is that if I do make a change, then I hit save and then I'll change it to a new one, kind of like revving up or changing a revision to a template editor. Kind of treat it like a revision. All right, so here kind of we'll read through to see what the costing is about. So $1.41 per pound. Obviously, more of it is on the machining side for this one. The block, this can be changed and updated to that. See if I click update, then it'll take into account that new block size. I can input a specific size in here. I can, obviously the preview stock is on, and it does have a lot size, the total number of parts. You'll see big differences if you have a setup for the entire lot or things of that nature. Markups, discounts, so I could purposefully increase the price directly for one of these parts or whatnot. But I would highly suggest trying to figure out how you're going to implement that into your template so you don't have to continually try to make adjustments for stuff. All right, so any changes that I would want to make, I'd want to hit save. I'm actually not going to keep this one. I'll go back to just using this other one and kind of accepting some of these errors out over here. These wouldn't add up too much, but again, I can change that by doing a right click here and apply a cost override. And I could type in $1 and then kind of have that updated. Pulls it up over under the mill operation folder, and you can see all of the cost breakdowns one by one. Don't forget that afterwards you can also run a report, and you can kind of take a look at how that's being costed. Again, for pockets, it's really just kind of calculating the volume and then calculating how that's putting that stuff into. So one thing that had been put in afterwards is, or pretty recently, is the idea that you might want to go over some of these parts. So say you're gonna want to account for a semi-finish, or add another operation and put in a finish there too as well. And those can obviously be removed as well. And that will allow you to make those changes as needed. Any of these, you also kind of you can kind of quickly check and see which one it's referencing. Here, I do believe it's kind of referencing that 0.01 and flat end mill. And but if I were to change that, obviously, let's see, that might be a cost override. So I could change it and have reference the 3/8, and then that kind of changes stuff around for me a little bit there again. So it's going a lot faster, taking care of that volume. But you want to see if that's realistic. Again, going through these, you kind of see on this end where that volume is taken out. All right, so I kind of want to have a slow introduction to, if you haven't used costing, kind of what it's doing for you, or what it can do for you there, and how a simple part would be set up. So I'm going to ignore kind of some of these smaller errors. I just kind of want to talk about that. Hit save and hit OK there. So now we're going to go to a little bit of, let's go ahead and hit up this sheet metal part. So if I open up this sheet metal part, it's immediately setting up the costing for me here. I can pull down a different one. I can go with an English standard. I can definitely go to making some edits right away, and then of course preferably want to save that out as your own. Here, if I were to launch template editor, like I was saying earlier, this is read only, so it's not going to let me make any changes. Be aware that even if it does look like you make changes, it won't save over to the same name. You'll have to save it to a different name. All right, so this one is looking okay. Let's just see what the begin cost estimate is going to look like. One thing about this is that I can kind of take a quick look here. Earlier I'd made a quick drawing of this, so I have a default derived configuration that came out earlier. And I can immediately see what that flat and bounding box are going to look like. But in costing too as well, I can actually see in a preview here what it's pulling out, what it's referencing. If I needed to, I could account for percent scrap, offset this. So it goes 0.1 outside the bounding box, and so on. Really, the thing that also came out in 2016, it's gotten refined a little bit as time has gone by, is this sheet size here. So if I wanted to cut these out of a sheet size of a 1x2 foot or 1x4 or 2x2, here we've got a few different options. We could do that, and what I've noticed is that these are kind of set up for certain gauges. So if you don't see it for your gauge, it might be that for that gauge it's not there. But some of those can be put in. So let's take a look at the bounding box nesting. All right, so this is another one that came out in recent years. So I'm looking at 2x2. These are pretty small. They're about 2 by 4 inches. And you can kind of see these fitting in as best as the computer thinks that it can put them in there. Obviously, sometimes the human touch might kind of be able to improve on that, but it is kind of neat to see firsthand what that can do for us. Okay, so here's a sheet metal part. Quickly, I guess we didn't look over here at the template. In the material, you kind of see that there are different classes of material that will go in here. It's a sheet metal part, so we're not going to see stuff like plastic, wood. But of these, we've got different kinds of options, other metals, select SOLIDWORKS material here. So I believe these are being controlled through the SOLIDWORKS materials. Okay, so bends. We can kind of quickly see how some of these are being set up for bends. If kind of narrow in, I've just been using the default material, but I can kind of switch that and it updates immediately. Here we're using about what an 18 gauge, and it would kind of just let me know where that's at, and if I wanted to, I could quickly change that too as well. But again, this is a read only, so I'd have to go through the trouble of hitting a save as, and that's not too big a deal. But for one change, maybe you might want to think about how many changes you're going to make, just because each one will then create a new file type that you're going to be playing around with. Okay. All right, so back to the whole assembly and kind of getting this whole thing together. We've done the sheet metal, played around with end mill size. We've kind of seen here that we can lock in the baseline a little bit. If I set it here, then I can kind of see afterwards where my change is, just kind of remind myself where that location is at. That's been around for quite a while. We did notice that at the assembly level, we were able to kind of create a toolbox folder and cost for these. I don't think that took, so I would have to kind of maybe override that cost. So that's one thing that I did kind of miss. I might have hit a check mark or something ahead of that. But we see some customized operations. This kind of came through from the template. It's just a penny here, but I could definitely override that and say, no, don't cost that out. I don't want to have anybody start worrying about that. Purchase parts, we don't have anything in here just yet. But we'll take kind of a quick look at some of the stuff that might be easily purchased. So we'll take a look, say, at this pin down here. And what's neat to see is that, okay, yeah, it's thinking, but obviously this is a stock part that maybe we might not consider. Let's just assume first that we would want to consider machining this for whatever reason. So we could start this begin cost estimation and move down here, and there's actually stock body types that you can pull out from. So custom plates would be predefined inside your template. Cylinder is going to match up right here typically, and then you can maybe change that around too if you need to. So here, assuming that it'd be milled, let me update this first. Here we go. Yeah, it was going to be milled. Now it's on an OD turn and 2 OD turns to kind of take care of both ends or the whole part. So that's pretty new. That happened in 2017. I'd say a lot of the changes did happen for 2017. That would then kind of start to allow you to start controlling this. Before then, you know, we weren't really able to take care of ID, OD, stuff like that. So price is pretty low, but the setup is really where the cost is hitting up. Like I said, basically we're going to consider, changing this around to a purchase part. But one neat thing is that if you ever needed to consider kind of coming back to this can be saved. It will first change the cost on the assembly, but then we can kind of reverse that by pulling on this, just doing a right click and setting this up to apply part settings and set this up as a used purchased cost. So say that just costs 75 cents to purchase. Then down here, I've now created a folder that has a pin there to kind of purchase. Something like this too as well, like SnapRing, and here I see that it's going to get estimated as a part here. Maybe if somebody needed to really have this kind of customized, that's great. This one I'm going to consider to just to the side, basically. So now this part right here, I can just select that, apply part settings, and use purchase cost. I'll put in $1.25 for that. Other stuff, maybe like this shaft, maybe this does need to be taken care of. So kind of a cool thing is sort of how things are being considered, how they're being set up ahead of time. So here right now, it's block, right? So we can change that to cylinder before we even begin the cost estimation. We'll want to kind of get to that though, because we want to take care of how these holes are being taken care of. So I'm going to hit the begin cost estimation. And you'll notice at here from the mill side, basically we're getting that it is a flat end mill. Yeah, possibly, maybe. Another option too would be great to know that we can change that around to a drill, and we certainly can if we just kind of right click up there and whatever choice you want to go with, it moves it to a different folder. You'll see a whole operation holder down here, and then that could very well influence the price and just kind of give you some more accuracy to this, more consistency. So here, convert to drill, carbide drilling. Mainly just for kind of example, and also let's take a look here, OD groove. So it's accounting for that groove right there. Again, so that's considering the volume taken off. And we'll take a look at the editor here. So we didn't really go through all of these here, but essentially you've got your tool engagement ratio, material removal rate, and that's different for each one of these setups to drill. All of these can be controlled. Turning too as well. It has a nice kind of visual feedback of what the variables are referencing here, and then the description here on the side, and then you have under the columns for each and every one of these. Again, with the flyouts here, you can kind of filter, narrow down, and then you can make changes as you need to. So my suggestion would definitely be that these get kind of set up on a trial basis first. So obviously, you want to kind of see where they match up, see if they match some of your previous quotes or any costs that you've had to incur for kind of creating your machining there, and then seeing how that matches up. And then those templates can be set up just for certain items. All right, so we've kind of played around with some of this stuff. Let's say, for example, one of these, I would want to actually make some changes here. So a neat thing that we can do too is actually kind of consider where some of the stuff is at by clicking on it. You'll see that it's highlighting. Just like a lot of stuff in SOLIDWORKS, that wasn't possible some years ago. So this is a nice update on the feature. And now that I kind of see this center hole right there, maybe what I want to do is kind of keep track of that. I'll call it a center hole. And the way that I renamed it was just to click on it and then type in the F2 key. So clicking on one of these, just get it highlighted, then I type in the F2 and I can rename it if I want to. All right, so this center hole, it's not bad that I've got a drill here, but what about these other ones right here? So let's just assume that maybe I could get these tapped holes and then get those screws kind of threaded onto that part. So maybe that was a design change. Maybe we weren't going to do that at first, and now we want to change that. So we can actually add that operation here. and have that set up to whatever that is. I'm not sure. That's probably a lot bigger than it's supposed to be. And obviously you'd want to kind of maybe measure some of these and know what you're working with. But if you're the one working with it, you've probably evaluated it a little bit and seen, what kind of sizes you have to deal with and work with. So again, here in situations where, maybe you don't have the exact same size, maybe that's a change that you need to make in the template. But here we see now tapping for that hole too. This one doesn't have it yet, so I want to click on the feature up here at the top. Go to tapping tool. I go to 20. And this one's already taken care of, so these would kind of tell me what's going on there. Also, the little warning there is just kind of telling me that it's not to the exact size, so it's just kind of a feature there to kind of let you know you might want to review it, and as long as you're okay with it, kind of can move on. So it's just for demonstration purposes, so we're not going to worry too much about the small details. This thing still has some other parts. So if I were to go through all these, might be a little bit of time there to kind of go through all of that. I think what I want to make sure is I kind of hit target on time for all this stuff. I've been looking at an outline I have here on the side, and looks like we've covered a lot of this stuff that I wanted to cover. Just looking at the sheet metal template, turn, introduced in 2019. We've also looked to see how you could change from mill to holes on that shaft part there that we had, or pin with holes. Then we also had changing to purchase parts. So that can be done over here just with a right click, change part settings, or apply part settings, excuse me. Also, assembly operation is one that we can also do for this thing. So a lot of these I'm going to kind of skip over. We didn't quite go through all of this stuff. This one I'll kind of comment quickly. This one does take the system of mine about a minute to kind of go through, and it has to do a lot with all these pockets that it's trying to calculate for. And then I kind of change that around to a cylinder, and that's actually what takes about a minute. And then it does the ID and OD for the other side too as well. But if I click on that, that might kind of hold up the machine for a minute or two. So I'm just going to kind of wait on doing that. Might do that at the end and just see what happens. Because running the webinar, I'm not sure if that would halt stuff to a complete stop there. But the one thing I did want to bring here, the current operation has to finish. Okay, so maybe I'm already being halted here. Let me go back and see what's going on. Okay, now it looks like I can go ahead and select. All right, so I'll right click here and add assembly operation. Let's say we wanted to start considering, this is a design that we were in charge of and putting together, machining or whatnot. And now what they want to have us consider is putting this together ourselves, right? Maybe now we want to consider putting that together. So we can consider how long it takes, maybe estimate, say 5 minutes or 9 minutes. You'll kind of have to calculate that out as seconds if you were to use this selection, or each have it to go to the each selected component or the entire selection. So here in this blue box, pretty much what I'm just going to do is select all of these here, and then that populates in that box. The rate is at $100 an hour. Let's say we can get this down to $25 an hour. Then when I hit OK, it calculates that and sets it to the side for me to worry about later. So now it's not something that I'm having to keep track of on an Excel sheet or something. It's kind of there for me to see, and then I can see it in the report, which we'll see at the end. So speaking of report, we'll go ahead and select that now. One great tool that they've added then too is alternate quantities. Alternate quantities in 2017 came out, and you'll see that here. I can press the button. This is kind of remembering what I picked last time I was playing around with this. So I'm going to go with the simple estimate because that's typically who we would give that for. You know, if you want to do a cost estimate, maybe we don't have to go through every single detail and the costs through each and every single end mill uh, on how that's broken down. You know, we just want a big, the big numbers there to kind of decide which direction this stuff is going to be going in. So obviously with the kind of costs we've got, we'll be pretty rich in no time. That's what we all want to hear, right? I'll still be doing this job, but I might be taking more vacation time is what I think I might do with this kind of quantity. But no, all kidding aside, so obviously this is kind of broken down into how my template took care of the part. You know, obviously a lot of these parts would be either purchased or unless they were customized, of course, but some of this stuff might be out of cast and so forth. So you know, not a very realistic part, but just to kind of show how those estimates are going to be populated in here quickly and efficiently. So this is a simple one. If you want to kind of take a good look at what you've got going on, then you know you'll want to make sure that the report is a little more detailed. So I kind of quickly run through that. And so I'll go back to generating report, and on a detailed report, when I hit publish, it'll come out with more information on that. All right, so also kind of what I want to go through then is kind of finalize this is to just go into an assembly that is going to be kind of driven by equations. So pretty much last year what had happened was some people kind of came up and they were saying, hey, you know, this is all great, but you know, the problem with this is we have to have this all kind of modeled up ahead of time. And we're trying to get quotes out sometimes before we have the entire model set up. So kind of what I did was I made a very crude setup of, you know, a set of slabs and rods here that could just kind of represent the basic starts of what could represent an even bigger tool. So this is just my interpretation of a very dumbed down assembly that would represent maybe a tool or just any other kind of assembly where basically things kind of change, but there's consistencies. So pretty much what I'm kind of saying here is, let's say on these tools we have these 4 rods. We always have those right there. And what gets changed are maybe the number of holes that kind of get drilled into these parts, and that expands as the part expands. So a really neat way to kind of be able to do that. I'd actually kind of experimented with this part here and kind of started at the beginning. And what I did was essentially was I created some equations at the part level. So you can actually create equations at the assembly level, but because I did it that way, I'm going to have to edit this part and pull up these equations right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the manage equations, kind of quickly show there was some stuff, a lot of stuff I didn't end up using. But basically what I kind of did was I tied that to these linear patterns and just kind of told it to take the overall length and then divide it by 8. And it kind of gets close to whatever number of instances that is. You can see here it would the perfect number would be 3.125, but then it gets close and just kind of divides that number and kind of considers, I mean, that many number of holes on the way out, right? So kind of what I'm thinking is that if you have these kinds of situations where the tool changes, then we could get a cost for, let's say, this whole thing. We do this begin cost estimate. With simpler parts, this is going to run a lot faster. So we're looking at this. We can kind of go through. Things look pretty, let's just assume so. Things kind of look more straightforward here for each part. You know, something like this is pretty easy. We'll hit the save button in. Well, that will make sure that it updates in the assembly. This one too, you know, before we kind of really get going, you want to make sure that this one's being estimated correctly. Obviously here it's a block, unless you really had to. Probably go with the cylinder, right? So we'll save that to make the changes on the other end. Here's a pin, so maybe something like this then just gets kind of broken down into, let me pull this up over here, maybe a purchased part. So I've got calculated parts over here, and this pin, I'll just change the apply part settings, use part, and maybe say 4.5, I don't know, $3 or whatever. Okay, so now that I've got this kind of set up, I'm going to go ahead and start editing the equations for this guy. All right. So say, for example, it's at 25 by 25 right now. If I wanted to, I could change that to 30 by 60. I'll keep this over to the side, kind of giving myself a heads up what this is going to look like. As soon as I hit OK, kind of updates that. And then this is all being set up. So obviously this could be very fun, pretty much consistent with maybe, the larger the tool, then the more the cost. It's updating. If I go over to this part, it's easy to see that it just kind of quickly updates it, hits a save, and then I'm back on board going back. As long as those drill sizes and everything were the correct sizes that I'm okay with, now I'm kind of flying through on being able to maybe quote somebody something a little bit faster. And just as an idea, maybe some stuff kind of changes. Here, for example, if I needed to, I could maybe kind of cut out something that's kind of crazy, maybe needs, maybe sharp corners or whatever it is, and, I'm having to figure out how I'm going to put that together. And, it turns out that maybe the best way to do that is with wire EDM. So I can actually kind of take into account for something like that. I'd have to just make sure that I pick all those edges. So say, for example, and this is basically a nonsensical part here, but I'm just kind of playing with it to kind of show some ideas. I'll do an extruded cut through both of these, kind of flying through all of that, and I'll even have that propagate to the feature parts, so it actually changes the costs on some of those there. So the first thing it's going to want to calculate this as is, as a pocket. So it doesn't even really take into account some of these. Maybe it does that it's just, it would take maybe longer to get through, or some of these sharp corners. I don't know what I kind of left in here. So let's take this into account. Let's look for it. There's the big pocket there at the end. I should be looking at the last feature, I guess, since that's the last thing that got added in there. So I'm going to override this. Oops, my mouse went over the mouse pad, and I'm going to select that to 0. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually customize that. So in these custom operations, I have not just different choices I can pull from, but I can also go ahead and name this myself as I'd like. So let's say wire EDM. And I know I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to kind of quickly go through this here. So let's say setup cost was $100 to do that for, per part assembly. And let's say at $30 per, I don't know, say inch of the edge length that I pick. Now all I need to do, I wouldn't want to pick all edges because that's going to pick every single edge around the part. I need to go around making sure that I pick this correctly. So some ideas here would be to maybe kind of pick one at a time. Oops, and that's right, I do have to kind of go back and then change to that at a custom operation. Okay, so I didn't actually select some of these. I want to make sure that I select all of these, or maybe if I just select most of these, if since time is running out. But what I can do is just quickly measure out how long of an edge that is altogether total. Hit OK, and then it's a pretty big part, and that's quite a little bit of an expense there to kind of get through and put that all together. But you can see that price change immediately, and then that, if I do hit save, then updates for the entire assembly here. And so kind of what I'm advertising is kind of taking a look at some of these setups. So for the part, I know I didn't kind of quickly cover how I did this. What I did was I put a hole here in the middle, and then I took advantage of a pattern-driven component pattern, and that allows me to pick the pattern that I had put together here for the part. So, and I said that skipping the fact that, that's how I put together these pins. So that's how it updates with these pins along in these holes. So for that, would be something like that. But the pattern itself actually is just driven by one hole and then an equation on this end and then that and stuff like that. All right, so I know I've kind of thrown out a lot at everybody, but I want to kind of just start wrapping up. If you want to start throwing in some questions or any comments or stuff like that you have, this is definitely something that I'd kind of promote having sent in to tech support for questions or follow-ups too as well. If you're kind of going to get into this, I'd be more than happy to try to field some of those. Just throw in the tech support side though, because we never know who's available. We're always kind of jumping around doing different things. I might be on a webinar or teaching a class, but be more than happy to kind of jump in and start trying to troubleshoot and maybe make some real progress with this stuff. I think that SOLIDWORKS has put in some effort in there, but kind of what we're seeing a little bit is that people are just staggering just a little bit to try and get onto the costing. So I guess that's what kind of motivated me to kind of introduce some of this stuff over to more people here. I do have here then pretty much for my outline, we covered just kind of a quick introduction of what it takes for doing the costing. Again, that's a pro license or premium. Premium would just kind of get you the assembly templates. Again, the templates that are included, you can't make changes to those, but you can definitely save one out, and then you can make edits to that. Makes sense. Toolbox parts, if you're going to do an estimate on that, you kind of want to do that at the very beginning. You won't see that option down here afterwards. The baseline is just kind of something to help you keep track of. So if this is your next baseline, you're kind of saying, okay, well, let's measure from here what kind of happens as we make changes to this assembly. So then you can maybe change to different templates and then see how that affects your baseline. So we saw that we can change ML. Costing Pack and Go, I didn't want to kind of run through that, but it is here for the Pack and Go. So I do have to save it, of course, like from any file, and then I'd be able to kind of hit the Pack and Go. Some of these features can be split. So say, for instance, if I'm gathering together into these areas, some of these pockets or whatever, this may not be the best example, but I can also add semi-finishing, finishing, and then that can also be broken up apart again too. The other thing too, new in 2017, was alternate quantities. Assembly operation, we saw how we were able to, at the assembly, kind of put together some costs for putting this stuff together. This one we didn't do that too, so add assembly operation, maybe this one at $100 an hour, and we say, well, this is going to take 2 full days. Oops, it's definitely not 16 seconds, but whatever that would come out to be, maybe I'll just make that, simplify that to 6,500, and then I want to make sure to add all those parts into this component. Give it a name. Oops. And hit OK. All right, well, I do see a handful of you guys still on here, and I'm glad to see that pretty much everybody who did start the webinar has stayed on till the end. I appreciate you kind of looking through this. Hopefully it'll help you kind of get some ideas, get started with with some of this costing. You can just kind of review and make sure that again, kind of fits with some of the stuff you've already costed out. And as you go through these templates, you'll find out what you're able to kind of take advantage of. Oh yeah, I guess one last thing, if I still got everybody on here. I did kind of skip through on the idea here. I think I didn't want to spend too much time on it, so I'm just going to quickly show it. So if I launch this here, I can come up to, let's say this, not the sheet metal actually. Let's click on main, click on the edit and get the machining. I can take a look at rules base. So this one's kind of a nice one. So say, for example, this is fine as far as creating your system or whatever it is, but maybe certain things like the size of it are going to really make a difference after a certain change in size. So you do have a ton of these different kinds of conditions. So if the material is chosen is specific to something that you've put down, then make that change. If, say, for example, the model weight goes above a certain size, that might change stuff for shipping and just kind of create a hassle that you might want to just go ahead and add a cost to immediately. So say, for example, if model weight is a certain size, it's going to be between a certain amount to another amount. So let's say maybe above 250 pounds to 2,000 pounds. We want to definitely add some sort of cost there, whatever that is. And just make sure that we're accounting for things like that so that whoever's kind of working with this template has that kind of automatically populated. And again, you don't have to make those changes at the end. So say, for example, here, kind of what I'm talking about is that you can always change the final price of it, but I would stay away from doing that if you can make sure to have that in the template. All right, well, it's been fun to kind of talk about the whole thing. It's a little bit different for me than having a classroom full of people where I'm kind of showing everybody, making sure that they know how to use the software. Also in tech support is where I spend a good amount of time too. So I do kind of field all kinds of questions anywhere in SOLIDWORKS and some stuff in simulation. And then I'm getting more involved with CAM, and I kind of see the kind of nice correlation here to costing, where it can kind of be a beginner guide. Hopefully this does kind of help out. I know a lot of the people who do quotes are in such high demand that they sometimes can't take vacations, or if they do on vacation, they have to do quotes. So maybe that could be an idea for kind of putting this together for you guys to use, and maybe start kind of considering it as a backup, or at least to see how consistent your quoting is, and see if it does kind of help you guys categorize that and then reduce time later. All right. Well, we're pretty much out of time, so thanks a lot. I appreciate everybody's time, and if you guys have any questions again, we'll be on tech support. Thanks a lot to everybody.